Hi, my name is Kirsten Gray, and this is my Integration of Psychology and Theology final. This is the Biblical Replies to Modern Social Responsibilities. I chose the subject of the biblical injunction to care for the poor, the orphaned, and the widowed, in contrast or comparison with the diffusion of responsibility. And this is my title slide. I chose a uniform font style and tile style just for the transition. I think it's important in a presentation. This is my introduction or abstract. It'll give you a general direction of where I'm going. Again, just repeating the format. This is a background on the biblical injunction to care for those who are in need. And I chose both an Old Testament and a New Testament Bible verse to show that it is something that's been repeated throughout time and history because of the importance and the fact that it's still a modern need. At the time, the widows and the orphans and the immigrants were people who were being much overlooked, and the area of need was large. This was repeated later and is still something that we're suffering today. The Old Testament verse that I chose, I did it because of its direct application, but as well as the spiritual application here. While those who once were immigrants need to treat the current immigrants with compassion, those who have repented of sins need to treat the people who are still struggling with compassion. The New Testament verse that I chose basically shows that we're not supposed to reserve this for just people that we know or who we choose, but we are supposed to give this kind of love and compassion and care to the stranger. And when we're doing this, as we are doing when visiting a prisoner and suffering as they are suffering, it is with humility. We are supposed to be loving from a way that we are in the same pain. And as once we were immigrants, we need to have compassion. When we are visiting the prisoner, we need to love as though we are incarcerated with them. This slide is an image slide. I chose a public domain image and cited it down here. The reference has a link in the biography to more history on this. This is the healing at the pool, the healing of Bethsaida. This is Jesus visiting the person and healing on the Sabbath. And I thought that it integrated well with the Bible verse that I chose to show that Jesus loved in an unconventional way. He didn't come for the social elite. He came to be with the sinners. He came to be with the sick, and he was with those people who had the most need. And as Christians, when we are called to be Christ-like, we are called to love as him and to act as him. And so the people that we choose to minister to need to be those with the most need. This next tile is my integration of an academic source, the Entwistle requirement for the textbook, as well as a biblical quote. And I believe that the greatest commandment coming from Jesus' mouth, calling us to love the Lord with all our heart and soul and mind, and to love the neighbor as ourselves. This is just really integrates well with what Entwistle is saying, that acknowledging every creation and every human as being made in the image of God, that it is all him. It's all his love. It's all his creation. And in order to love him, we need to love them all, each and every human being. This next slide is the introduction to the diffusion of responsibility. It's also where I integrated one of my source requirements. Alex Linkerman describes the what the diffusion of responsibility is and possible reasons behind it. It was, I thought, a good quote for background. This continues the comparison and contrast. The diffusion of responsibility can have multiple sources, but whatever it roots from and stems from, it has very direct spiritual application to us. We are called to action. We're not just called to compassion. And shrugging that off, just saying, oh, someone else will do it for me. No, we are called to care. We are called to love. And there is some very direct application to ignoring that. It is a sin. And I believe that in following Christ's footsteps, Christ was not passive. He took a very active hand in love. The next few slides will be seeing the need, the modern need of these people, and this slide integrates a source requirement as well as a visual requirement for a graph. The source was the Social Security Administration in their 2014 review of the elderly poor, and over a third of that population is widows. These are people's grandmas, these are people's family members, and not only is it just a direct call, but these are directly related to us, and it's a modern and current need. This next slide is my academic peer-reviewed source. This was a wonderful article on about how school psychologists can help the Arab refugees. It had a lot of wonderful information about how the refugees are impacted, how things like discrimination and lack of acknowledgement for their respect of their culture, or different family involvement can lead to some serious mental health problems. And it had it very much showed that these are still people in need, and this is a very modern issue. It's something that we can't ignore. This last slide of showing the need of the orphan is a very sad one, in my opinion, because while all adoptions might not be orphan children and all orphan children are not adopted, this shows an area where children in need are abandoned by society. I highly doubt the decline in adoption is due to that significant of a decline in births. And it just really shows to me an area where children who are already hurting are being further damaged by society's lack of involvement. This is my response slide. After reviewing the call as well as the contrast to the diffusion of responsibility, it's just very apparent to me that we need to do something about this. How, what, that really is going to be on a personal level. But I believe that first we need to acknowledge areas that might lead to the diffusion of responsibility, such as feelings of insufficiency, sins, ignorance, apathy, or denial. I put those three together because I think they are. Willful ignorance probably is more what I was saying by ignorance. Sometimes you just don't know of a need and therefore you don't respond. But the people who just go by saying, oh, that's not really a need. Oh, those people are just, they make excuses for it. They're still people in need. Whether or not we see it, they're still there. And we're not here to judge. Oh, that person's homeless because they're a drug addict. No, they're still homeless. It's still cold. They don't have food. They don't have a house. Don't ignore that need. Instead, we need to reject these tendencies and instead replace them with positive responses. Recognizing need, personalizing that responsibility, saying, I'm responsible in a certain way. Christ called me to love people. taking action on an individual level. Don't diffuse the responsibility. Don't just pay someone else to do it for you. If you do want to donate, research where you're donating, research how you're donating. I have a very kind of personal insight in this. I live in Southern California and was just in the area subject to the Thomas Fire. One of the local businesses was selling a t-shirt, and a very, very small portion of the proceeds were going to actual relief. Instead, there were people that were driving down with tools and jackets and water bottles, and it was much more of a direct impact. You need to act with integrity. When we are answering this call, we can't diffuse responsibility. We can't shrug it off. We can't pass the ball. We need to act with integrity. This is my conclusion slide. Basically, the concluding sentiments on this subject, as well as an umbrella Bible verse. I believe that 1 John 4:7 is just one of the best Bible verses that really is an umbrella for all called to compassion and love. It's time to answer that call. This is my reference slide. I used multiple academic references, peer-reviewed articles, as well as another outside article. I've cited the government sources that I used for my graphs, as well as the artist, and there's links to any of those that were digital. I thought it was very important for this subject to use diversity in sources, so I did. This is a plight that, while this is the integration of theology and specifically the Christian biblical injunction, this is a plight that's all over the world, and it is really something that I thought by using a diverse selection in sources that helped to express that. Thank you, everyone, for viewing it. I wish you all a Merry Christmas. Have a great night.